Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I am so glad you're here today because we're tackling something that plays out right in front of our eyes on television all the time, yet it remains incredibly misunderstood. When a high-profile event occurs, like a targeted shooting, the gap between the swift, easy justice we see in TV dramas and the grueling, meticulous reality of building an ironclad federal case is just absolutely massive. So today we're completely breaking down the invisible machinery of the justice system and post-incident security. And we're doing this using insights directly from former FBI Special Agent Nicole Barker. So the next time you see breaking news on your feed, you're going to know exactly what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Okay, let's dive into this. It is literally the most common question the public asks, and Agent Barker noted she used to get this question all the time. Think about it. When an incident plays out in a crowded lobby, it's captured on security cameras and broadcast across social media and news networks, well, it feels like an open and shut case, right? You see the footage and immediately wonder, everyone saw what happened, so why on earth is there a trial? Why doesn't the suspect just plead guilty to life without parole and be done with it?
Well, that question brilliantly illustrates the disconnect between fiction and reality. In movies and on TV, we are totally conditioned to expect quick, easy plea deals. A suspect gets caught red-handed, and within a 60-minute runtime, they've confessed and they're sent away. But in the real justice system, every single defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty. That presumption of innocence is a foundational pillar. And what that means is that winning a prosecution is incredibly hard work. The system is intentionally designed to be an uphill battle, to protect citizens from state overreach. It forces agents and prosecutors to meticulously build a case that can convince a jury who will be repeatedly instructed to presume the defendant is completely innocent.
To make sense of how all this works, we're going to break this down into 4 clear stages today. First, the burden of proof. Second, anatomy of the evidence. Third, the human element. And fourth, the after-action review.
Starting right off with Section 1, the burden of proof, and how prosecutors navigate those huge legal hurdles.
The crucial point here revolves around the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. The government has to prove everything to this incredibly high legal standard. I love how Agent Barker perfectly summarized it. It's not what you know, but what you can prove. You might know exactly who did it because, hey, you watched the video online. But as an investigator or a prosecutor, can you assemble the facts in a court of law so clearly that absolutely no reasonable hesitation remains in the minds of the jurors? This is exactly why cases that look incredibly simple on Twitter actually take months or even years to resolve in reality. It is a monumental task.
And to reach that standard, investigators have to follow a very strict chronological path. First up, they gather evidence in a way that is legally admissible in court. Then, before you ever get to a trial or a plea agreement, an FBI agent or law enforcement officer actually has to go before a grand jury to present probable cause. And Agent Barker highlighted a really interesting variable here. In a jurisdiction like the District of Columbia, which is a predominantly liberal district, jury pool dynamics can be pretty unpredictable. When you're presenting a highly publicized case to a grand jury, you never truly know what might happen based on those local dynamics. But procedure demands that the evidence is impartially presented to secure an indictment. Only after all of that does the suspect face the choice of signing a plea agreement or actually going to trial.
So what exactly are they trying to prove? In a case involving an attack on a federal agent, prosecutors are looking at specific, really heavy federal charges under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. To break that down quickly for you, Title 18 is basically the main criminal code of the federal government. Under that umbrella, we're looking at Section 111, which covers assault on a federal officer, and Section 924, which covers committing a violent crime using a firearm. The prosecution doesn't just have to prove that a bad thing happened, they literally have to prove every single element of these specific statutes beyond a reasonable doubt.
Moving right along to Section 2, anatomy of the evidence. This is where they actually build that federal case.
Now, what's really fascinating about this phase is the sheer diversity of the evidence. It's almost never just finding a single smoking gun. It's a mountain of evidence. For physical evidence, you've got the weapon, the shell casings, and the complex trajectory analysis from ballistics experts. You also have things like the ballistic vest the agent was wearing when shot, a highly tangible, undeniable piece of physical evidence. But then you move into the digital realm, which is huge. You have the video and audio surveillance from the lobby showing everything leading up to the event. And crucially, investigators are going to heavily scrutinize digital devices, phones, laptops, tablets, just to extract text messages and emails.
And those digital communications are vital, because they lead us to the psychological weight of the evidence. Agent Barker specifically pointed out that something like a manifesto is a deeply powerful piece of evidence to present at trial because it establishes the frame of mind of the defendant. It shows intent. But beyond the clinical analysis of data and documents, you also have the human toll. When you combine that psychological insight with a deeply serious,
harrowing victim testimony from the actual Secret Service agent who was shot, taking the stand in court, you create an incredibly compelling, powerful narrative for the jury.
There's also a vital legal nuance here regarding the suspect's own words. Every suspect has the right to counsel, and law enforcement will read them their Miranda rights, giving them the right to remain silent. However, if a subject starts talking to law enforcement right after being apprehended, but before they decide to invoke those rights and discontinue the conversation, well, those initial statements can be completely admissible. This is a massive misconception. People think if they aren't read their rights immediately, they just get off on a technicality. No way. In reality, voluntary early statements are absolute gold for prosecutors, and they'll present those early statements as crucial evidence in the trial. That brings us to Section 3, the human element, and the stark reality on the ground. Looking at the footage of these high-stakes events really reveals a striking, sobering visual dichotomy between civilians and law enforcement. When violence erupts, civilians, naturally and rightfully, get to duck, hide under tables, and try to escape. But the police and Secret Service agents, they don't. They're expected to stand up, remain fully exposed to the threat, and protect the people who are hiding. It is a profound contrast. It's actually worth noting that in reviewing this particular event, President Trump praised the police for their bravery and exposure, and impartially directed any criticism regarding the venue's overall security away from those frontline officers who stood their ground when it mattered most.
Agent Barker summarized this gravity perfectly. She said, "You are expected to put your life on the line every single day. It's a high-pressure job, and not every law enforcement officer comes home alive." The Secret Service operates on a zero-fail mission to protect the president, who is the most powerful person in the world. And they work tirelessly to do this. In fact, they remain on duty, putting their lives on the line, even remaining unpaid during government shutdowns. It's an immense, grueling commitment that absolutely demands our respect.
Finally, let's look at Section 4, the after-action review, and how these agencies look to the future. As Agent Barker points out, no law enforcement officer or agency is perfect, which is why the end of an incident isn't actually the trial. It's the continuous loop of learning and systemic evolution of how security is handled moving forward. The Secret Service will conduct a full, comprehensive after-action review, where they examine every single detail of the event and adjust accordingly. They will look critically at their current protective model. If aspects of it are found to be antiquated or a little old, they're going to look to implement advanced technology to up their game. Where there was a standard perimeter, they might evaluate establishing a much wider perimeter. They'll shift from standard venue sweeps to looking much more closely and critically at the specific vulnerabilities of locations. Basically, they learn and they adapt. So the work of building an ironclad prosecution is incredibly complex, but so is the work of preventing the crime in the first place. The next time a major incident breaks on the news, you now know about the immense, invisible machinery working away in the background. But it leaves us with a big question. As technology evolves and the threats we face become increasingly complex, will our security models adapt fast enough to protect the invisible machinery of our democracy? It's a systemic challenge that goes far beyond a single courtroom or a single perimeter, and it's something every law enforcement agency is going to be wrestling with in the years to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.